Joe, how are you?
Exactly the same
as last time. Okay, I'll ask a question then. What's your favorite weapon?
My favorite weapon.
One of my friends used to ask his sons at birthday parties, "What's your favorite weapon?" All the mothers were always horrified by the enthusiastic responses.
Well, the answer in my case is probably obvious. That my favorite weapon is language.
Ah, very good. I was hoping for something like that.
I'm glad not to disappoint. We have a guest today. We often have guests. We don't always have guests, but today we do. And my first question, I warned her just before we started this that some of my questions might be silly, and this is no exception. How do you pronounce your last name, Nina?
Oh, that's not a silly question. Everybody asks that. Well, okay. Nina Munteanu. It's pronounced Munteanu. Did you notice I kind of wanted to bring my hands up Munteanu when I said it?
Well, yeah, that's the next question then is should we say it always with such flair?
That's it. Okay, first of all, it's a Romanian name. Munte means a mountain. Anu means from, so I'm from the mountain.
Okay.
It is meant to be in Romanian pronounced with that U the way it is, Munteanu, but I never pronounced it that way. I pronounce it Munteanu. I've anglicized it.
Yeah.
And I was taken to task. I was on a radio show with a Romanian who was the host. And she, on the air, first thing she did to me was she said, "Nina, you're mispronouncing your own name." She pronounced it right. And then I went, there you are, right? That's the first thing that you encounter. I was just.
Who isn't mispronouncing their own name? Like Mahoney is not the pronunciation of my name. No way.
Really?
In fact, I'm the first generation in my family to have it pronounced Mahoney. My father grew up as a Manny. And before that, it was almost certainly Mahoney and probably O'Mahony before that.
Whoa, Mahoney.
And you know what? My father's family grew up in a mountain in northern New Brunswick. So I feel like your last name is the Romanian version of my last name. So really, I should be Joe Munteanu.
Oh, and I could be Nina Mahoney. Oh, just to finish that up, Nina is my nickname. I'm not going to give you my real name. Nina means little girl.
Oh.
So I'm the little girl from the mountain. That means Heidi, right? Is anyone old enough to know about that?
That's great.
Oh, wow. Well, welcome to the podcast, Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what we have done in this podcast so far is we ask our guests to tell us about themselves.
Oh, this is where I start. Well, I always kind of go funny when people ask me these open questions like that, because what am I? I'm everything. I'm so many things.
I contain multitudes.
Exactly. And there's a quote, right? I am paradox. Well, how does that go?
It's Walt Whitman is all I can tell you for sure.
I'm allowed to be paradoxical because I am multitudes. And I am. I'm an ecologist primarily, for sure. I have a passion for the environment, for what we're doing and preserving it. And I'm a naturalist. I love nature. I go to the woods and to the river here where I live. I'm blessed with that ability every day, no matter what the weather. And I'm out there enjoying it. But I'm also a mother, traveler, discoverer, explorer. If I was a man in the 17th century, Mark, or wherever, I would have been an explorer. I've been out there except I'm scared of water, which is kind of weird.
That shocks me.
That's super ironic.
Having said that, I love water. I'm scared of it, but I love it. And I studied it my entire life.
I've just called the irony police. They're on their way.
Yeah, you did, right? Okay. I'm ready.
Wow.
I got over my fear of water as a child. I couldn't swim by studying it. I was fascinated by it.
It makes sense now. Yeah.
As a young girl, I would, like Da Vinci, I was looking at all the patterns of water and how water did things and all its anomalous properties. And I just became so fascinated. And in a sense, that became my doorway into my career as an ecologist and a limnologist. And I pursued my writing accordingly, not knowing that I was writing ecofiction. I called it science fiction, which I guess it is. I wrote a bunch of short stories, all to do with, speaking of irony, the ironies of existence and what we're doing to the environment. And all my short stories are ironic. They all have twist endings and stuff. But the novels are a little bit more of a treatise on the human condition and how we are paradoxical creatures and how nature is paradoxical and how we integrate. And that's actually also why I love this book that I want to talk to you about. Two things. Number one, first of all, what's the book? It's The Overstory by Richard Powers. And I think he got some awards for it. Winner of the National Book Award. There you go. It's this fat little thing. You can't see it because we're on radio sort of thingy. But it's over 500 pages long. It's called The Overstory. So you can imagine overstory, trees, right? Trees are the overstory and the understory are the shrubs and everything else in a forest. And what I loved about that book was a number of things, but the story that it told was, number one, very personal, but also very global. And it was very meaningful and it moved me. These days, more than anything else, although even as a teenager, I was reading Karl Marx when I was a teenager. Should I have said that too?
Yes.
It's the other irony police coming after me.
No, that's not ironic at all.
I was reading, Communist Manifesto. I was reading all kinds of cool stuff back then. And I got into some frivolous stuff later on. And nowadays I find that I'm really gravitating toward ecofiction. And that's not just because I write it, but it is because I write it. Because, I'm one and the same. That's my life right now. And I consider myself an environmental activist, for sure. I'll go and confront somebody who's littering. I don't care how big they are. My son is, 2 heads taller than me already, so who cares, right? Anyway, but to go back to the book, so the book is basically about this 9 characters. It follows the life stories of 9 characters and their journey with trees. Each character is presented in the beginning. This guy, Powers, is so cool. He presents the characters first, and then he mingles them all together into this wonderful flow of narrative. And each character is associated with a particular tree. So right away, the tree is an avatar of the character, or is the character an avatar of the tree? We're not sure which. We think first it's the character, the tree is an avatar of the tree. But by the end of the book, I think it's the other way around. So the trees are the real characters, and they come through these people. They represent these trees, an aspect, whatever's going on. The trees are going extinct, and some of these trees do go extinct. One's the chestnut tree. It's presented initially. And so there's ironical connections between these characters and the trees as well. Some are good folk and some are not so good folk. One person gets electrocuted, but comes alive again. And then her voice seems to integrate into the forest to change another character's pathway. So there's all kinds of, it's not magic realism, but there's shades of that. But what Powers does is it's very powerful in that he keeps it very real. It's present day, takes place in present day, and it kind of talks about things that are current right now, issues of deforestation, issues of what's going on, particularly in the West Coast, because that's where one of the characters ends up going.
With the giant redwoods and whatnot.
Yes, the giant trees, the Douglas firs and redwoods. And she, of course, identifies with the Doug fir, the giant Doug firs. And, of course, out there at UBC is Suzanne Simard, one of my heroes, who studies trees, not just trees, but the fact that trees form communities.
Yeah, and they communicate.
And societies, and they communicate in many different ways through their aerosols, through their roots, through the fungi that live there, the mycorrhiza that trade goods with the trees. The fungi actually kill the springtails. Almost literally, it's really weird, like a pet. They kill the springtails and bring it to the tree and say, "There you go. Now give me some sugar." It's this weird, wonderful thing that's going on. And Powers has this gorgeous language that he uses to allow us to literally fall into the duff of the forest,
Into the what of the forest?
The duff.
The duff. What is the duff?
The duff is the top litter. It's almost the same as litter, but it's other things as well as. It is another way of saying litter, but I think it's more specific to the leaves and
that's an actual term?
Yeah, duff, D-U-F-F.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so I meant to, explore the feeling of being in the forest, and he does that. And
right.
You're there with the character. You're there feeling, smelling, without being overly, Baroque. He's quite sensual in his writing, and matter of fact. But
do you know much about him? Or?
No, I don't. But I do know a lot about Suzanne Simard. One of the reasons I bring Suzanne Simard into the thing is one of his characters might as well be Suzanne Simard. If you know of her history, she started off in the forestry industry, and as you can imagine, what she had to do. And then she broke away from it with all this trees are communicating, and you can imagine how that fell over there, how that went. And they kind of went, listen, you're not getting any funding. And literally very similar to what this poor character went through. And the character, in fact, is a disabled person, this main character, Patricia Westerford. So Patricia is actually has a disability. She can hardly hear. So that's ironic, right? So speaking of ironies, we were earlier, there's lots of irony here too, and the way that things are connected. And the reader is allowed to make those connections. He doesn't bump you on the head.
Oh, that's great.
This is this. He lets you do that, but it's all intermingled and it weaves beautifully. So the ironies with her character are amazing, the way they go through with her journey. And in some ways, her journey becomes the main thread by which all the other characters come through. So, in some books, I don't know if you've ever had that problem where too many subplots are happening.
Right.
A book is just so bloody dense, and you go from one chapter to the next, and you literally lose people. You end with Peter in chapter 1 or chapter 3. And then you go chapter 4, 5, 6 with all these other characters. And you come back to Peter and you're kind of going, Who
is Peter again?
Who is this? Who's Peter? Do I care about Peter? And then you lose it, right? As soon as that happens, you've lost it. He doesn't do that. He has a lot of characters. He's got 9 characters he's juggling.
Yeah.
But each of them is somehow underneath the main story, right? That Patricia Westerford following through. I love it. I mean, you don't notice it as a writer, as a teacher of writing, right? I teach at U of T, so I'm looking for these things.
Yeah, I have a writerly question, just so that I have a better picture of the book. What perspective is it told from? Like, is it third person omniscient? Is it third person point of view?
It's third person.
It is, yeah. But is he switching points of view when he's moving to the other characters?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's hard to write.
So, but the point is, character A, character B, we won't name them all. But character A is never in character B's story, and character B is never in character A's story. They do come all together, but not in one place. They don't even meet each other. Well, that's not true. A couple of them do. But it remains in third person limited third person voice. So it's very easy to follow. I mean, this is one of my all-time favorite books, and it informs my own writing, and my own writing literally informs the whole field. So it's good for me to know what else is out there. So it's not that I'm doing research all the time, but I guess I am doing research all the time.
Because you're really all in a conversation with one another, really. Like Powers writing about that, and you writing about your work, and others. Like I'm thinking of the woman who wrote Lab Girl, which was largely about
Lab
trees.
Girl.
Yeah.
Yep.
And even from SF Canada, Dale Sproul wrote, I know he has a book about trees.
Oh, he does? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that. I didn't know that. There was a quote here, someone who had done a review of the book. Let me just check it. Benjamin Markovitz of The Guardian. This is what he wrote. There's something exhilarating in reading a novel whose context is wider than human life. Like Moby Dick, The overstory leaves you with a slightly adjusted frame of reference. And I found while reading that some of what was happening to his characters passed into my conscience like alcohol into the bloodstream and left a feeling behind of grief or guilt even after I put it down.
Oh.
And that's, whoa. He was touched. He was moved. He was challenged. All these things through story, not some article telling you, points and stuff. But to be honest, I find partly because of the epic scope of this book. And I mean, I liken it to the fact that the place is character. I mentioned that before. The trees, the forests, they come alive through the characters that interact with them. So I don't know if you've read Thomas Hardy. It's an old classic.
Oh, yeah.
Egdon Heath. Egdon Heath is a character. This Heath literally destroys people and helps people, right? Nurtures them, depending on who that person is. Herbert's Dune, same thing. How powerful that planet is, that desert planet that nurtures these giant, misunderstood giant worms that literally make Dune. If you find out the ecology of it all. So his characters, his human characters are, like I said before, I think they're the true avatars for the trees that are just, almost symbolically placed there. And then you get that. I mean, imagine what a way to do that. I mean, that he was able to do that to that reviewer. He did the same thing to me.
What I really like is like the guests that we have in this podcast speak so passionately about these pieces of art. It's really compelling. You really want to enjoy them and savor them yourselves.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
Good. I hope you do.
My to be read list is just getting more insane, more insane. It's oh my God, I've got so much good stuff to read.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool. Are you a fast reader though, or a slow reader?
I am when I have the time to read.
Yeah.
I've had this horrible pattern that's emerged over the last, I think it's pre-pandemic, but it's certainly, I have trouble reading fiction while I'm drafting.
Oh, okay.
I find that it just influences me too much. So I do read quite a bit of nonfiction when I'm drafting.
So do I.
Yeah, and then for my holidays, I save like fiction. I think last holiday I read 14 books in 14 days.
Oh,
and that included something by Umberto Eco. So yeah,
really?
That was a 3-book, 2 days kind of thing.
I don't feel the same at all about, I will read fiction. I mean, it takes me so long to write a novel. Like if I weren't to read fiction while I'm writing it, there would be like a 12-year drought.
Yeah, sure.
Oh dear. You don't want to do that.
I like being influenced by what I'm reading. In fact, I had the experience today. One of our previous guests talked about William Goldman, The Color of Light.
That's what I'm reading right now.
Yes, me too.
Yes.
And
oh, there you are. Look at that.
And I just finished Act 2, and I was so blown away by how Goldman finished Act 2 that it's completely changed the trajectory of the work that I'm currently writing. I realized that my Act 2 is like, that's not how you finish Act 2. You finish Act 2 the way William Goldman finishes Act 2.
Yeah.
Whoa. Well, you're using it in the right way.
That's
Joe. I think that is awesome. And we can all learn, right? We're always learning. We're continually learning. I mean, I've got 13 books behind me and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
And my process is changing. This is a weird thing. And as I gain my experience, I go this way or that way, and I change the way that I approach a book. And, just like what you've done there, I think that is awesome.
Can you talk about that a bit? Like, how has your process changed?
How has it? Yeah, because I'm interested in that.
Oh, well, I used to be a strong outliner. I used to outline a lot.
Not a pantster.
No. And now I'm more pantsing. And I write more like Diana Gabaldon. I don't know if you've ever heard some of her discussions of her process, and she'll talk about a kernel, and she'll describe it, and she'll literally create a scene, and it's an isolated scene. She has no idea where it's going to fit, but she knows what it is. She's got this thing in her head, right? This image, this feeling. And then she was describing the process, so we do find out how she does that. And then she has a way of finding context for that scene and then places it somewhere as a gift. And what a way to write.
Interesting.
I mean, it's, it's good grief.
That's like the ultimate prompt.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, actually it is.
Because how does it become and feel organic and holistic doing it that way? And I've no doubt that it does.
I think partly the connective tissue helps, and then she very likely rewrites that very scene to connect, to then better connect contextually. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
that's fascinating to me, Nina, because I've undergone the same transformation.
You're kidding.
I used to be a meticulous planner, and like literally, I would write hundreds of pages of character notes. And my first book, I actually had a painting of the book showing all of the characters had their own color and their strands.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
And it was kind of cool. But yeah, I've become a pantser, and that's why I don't like to read novels while I'm writing, because I think you're right. If in terms of like learning from other authors, yeah, absolutely. But I guess I'm just too porous. So I noticed that, my prose starts to look like somebody who I'm reading at the moment's prose, which I don't want. And I don't think the reader wants either.
Well, that's wise, Mark. You understand where your character and what you do and what influences you, and you act accordingly. That's really smart.
And frankly, there's so many amazing nonfiction writers that there's no dearth of things to read.
Yeah, I'm like that too, particularly like you were talking about when you're drafting, when I'm putting things together. And like I said, my process has changed. So I'm piecing things together as I move along. And I let my nonfiction inform where my story is going to go and how it's going to proceed, even which character does what, based on this material that I'm garnering. So for instance, this book I'm working on right now starts in Berlin, contemporary Berlin. It's focused on two twin brothers who are very, very different, even though they're identical twins. I've never been to Berlin, except virtually, and I always wanted to go. My mother is from there, so I have some of that, and friends as well. But the history of Berlin, gorgeous, gorgeous city, full of wonderful things. But what a history, right? The East and West, the wall, the communist, the Soviet side, the West side, and all the things that happened. So I was doing a lot of research, and that research literally created a character. I've never done that before. Like, that character just decided, I am here because of it literally materialized and went, boop, I need to be right there. Stir the pot, It's just amazing. And the fact that we, as seasoned writers, and I think we're all agreeing that as we get more seasoned, we can take, I don't know if it's more risks, we can be a bit more loose about our craft. And I don't mean loose in that we don't pay attention, but loose in our structure, more open to possibilities and stuff. And I just love it when that happens. I love it.
Yeah. I certainly wouldn't describe myself as a seasoned writer. I'm probably about 4 stages before that, but I do know what you're talking about, because I have one novel out, but working on the second novel was definitely looser than the first novel.
You notice it? Yeah. Getting that first novel out is huge, isn't it, Joe? I mean, we can remember our first novel, all the steps that we had to take to get there, and then what we had to learn about ourselves, about our writing, about the process and everything. So you take that with you to the next one. It's almost like giving birth. Sorry, guys. But when you're a mom, you have this one kid up, and there's so much involved. There's so much unknowns and this and that. The second one, easy peasy. Well, third one, hardly think about it, right? And it's the things that you bring with you to the next one. They don't go away. It's like riding a bike, right? All the steps that you get to.
Yeah, except it's funny. You mentioned identical twins earlier. In my case, my second child was 10 minutes after the first one. So we didn't really have a lot of time to absorb the lessons from the first one.
Joe. Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
But that's extra fun though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Oh, kids are amazing.
Back to Powers. It has to be a conscious choice by a writer like him to write separate books and not do so under a different pen name,
That's
which
true.
I know is a strategy.
Yeah. But maybe in his mind, he wasn't writing eco-fiction. Very likely not. He's just writing what he writes. And to be honest, when I was writing eco-fiction, I wasn't thinking it was eco-fiction.
Ah,
If you were to present this book honestly to anyone out there in the world, the regular Joe on the street, they wouldn't think it's eco-fiction. They wouldn't name it that. If they know this author, they would think of him as, a literary fiction writer.
Yeah.
And case in point, Margaret Atwood.
right.
Margaret Atwood writes so much speculative fiction these days, and she started way back in the 80s with Handmaid's Tale. But did anyone call her a science fiction author, including herself? No.
Lots of people did, but she just denied it.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know about lots of people, but the point is people who read Margaret Atwood, mostly the people who read her stuff, who have read her previous stuff, would never go, well, I'd say never say never, wouldn't necessarily put her in that category because they're used to her.
Yeah.
They're used to her being a literary fiction writer.
Oh, you are absolutely correct. And when she started writing, like The Handmaid's Tale, I was actually working as the technician on a show called Reg and Company. And we would have that conversation. And of course, I was a big science fiction fan. And I would say, well, that's science fiction. And they would get quite annoyed with me. No, that's not
exactly.
It can't possibly be a science fiction. And I'm like, no, it's. And then I said, well, if it isn't science fiction, what is it? And the response was, well, it's speculative fiction.
Oh, see, because they have an idea of what science fiction is, and of course that was Margaret Atwood's little thing as well. She just, I think she knew perfectly well what science fiction was. She just didn't want to be branded at that point. It was not in her interest to be branded there. It is now.
Yes,
as you can see, she openly admits to it. Yeah. So it's changed.
Yeah, no problem. No, it's gone mainstream now, though.
That's exactly it, Mark.
It's gone mainstream. Yeah,
there are a lot of others like her who are literary fiction authors who are writing speculative fiction, and some of it could be called science fiction. A lot of them, a lot of the eco-fiction stuff that's out there, is written by literary fiction authors who have entered that arena, who have entered that area. And I think it's because, as you said, Mark, it's part of it anyway, has gone mainstream. Mm-hmm. And that part that's gone mainstream is essentially under the umbrella of ecofiction, environmental fiction, climate fiction, any kind of fiction that has to do with what's going on with the world right now and the environment, which is on a lot of people's minds right now. And it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's happening is we're closing that divide. So literary fiction authors who are, never touched that stuff are now writing it. And science fiction authors equally are heading into the more mundane science fiction and heading into literary fiction. And my latest book is an example of that, A Diary in the Age of Water. And it's not touted as science fiction.
And that's the one that's out now. Right.
Yeah. That's by Inanna Publications. Yeah. And that's it's the diary of a limnologist, actually. It's touted as women's literature, as climate literature, but it's under the umbrella of literary fiction. And I think that's what's happening with a number of writers who are heading into that middle ground between those genres. And slowly and surely it's more of a continuum than a real gap,
Yeah. And as soon as we see some actual zombies appearing in the world, then you'll see Margaret Atwood and the other so-called literary writers writing zombie novels, right? Because then it'll be...
Well, you're right. You're so right, Joe. And I'll be waiting for that moment.
Wait a minute. Should we be preparing for that moment?
Okay. I think so. Okay. I need to have a talk with you, Mark.
Okay. But now what I have to ask, what makes something literary fiction as opposed to not literary fiction?
Oh, there's a loaded question. Have fun with that one.
Well, okay. In my mind's eye, because this latest book of mine is basically literary fiction with science fiction, whatever, climate fiction. What makes it literary fiction? It's not the use of metaphor, even though metaphor is very much part of it. The artistic
and the answer
style,
can't be because it's good.
Exactly that too, because science fiction is nothing but metaphor, right?
Yeah.
But literary fiction borrows on real. It's set here in the here and now, and it often uses, almost every literary fiction writer I know uses real life as their guiding point to write about the human condition as it is, period. And so, I mean, that's my loosey-goosey definition of literary fiction.
Is Kurt Vonnegut literary fiction?
I don't think so, but
Oh,
I mean,
God.
you could make the argument for it based on that definition. Yeah, and actually, you could even make an argument for it based on my definition.
Okay.
Which is that in literary fiction, plot is much less important than style.
I would agree with that, totally.
The way that prose is written matters a great deal in literary fiction, where the plot is less important concern.
Yeah.
The story doesn't have to move along because there's no expectation of that. It's, I'm going to bathe in this author's mind for a while, and that's perfectly good. I mean, that's perfectly acceptable. Yeah. And I would say from that perspective, yeah, Vonnegut would qualify because he is quite a stylist.
Yes, he is. Yep, I would agree.
Yes,
it's you touched on something really good there. It's theme. Theme is the thing that is
theme is more
so
important than plot.
So important in literary fiction. It could literally have no plot, and it would be still good.
It would still
literary fiction.
Yep. Yeah. When I was a plotter, I would have a plot. I would have character sketches, and then I would have a thematic sketch as well. So here's the themes of the book, and here's how things fit into the themes.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was my pretense too, as I was trying to write literary fiction as well as science fiction. But
you could argue. I mean, every story has to have plots. You could argue that in literary fiction, theme is plot. or
replaces plot in some
plot is theme.
Yeah. Well, it's more like life. Like, it doesn't necessarily make as much sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the resolution of the story is not usually as neat in literary fiction.
So, Nina, do you try to write literary fiction, or do you care whether you write literary fiction? Or
that's a great question. I'd have to think about that. And because I have to think about it, I guess it's not really that important. What's important for me is where I'm going. Me personally, I know I'm on a journey. And I know that I'm moving away from what I would call traditional science fiction. And it is heading into the literary fiction area. And part of that is because I really want to focus more on theme. As we talked about, Mark, and the stylistic side of things. Yeah. And to that point, I'm playing around a lot more with style, with different styles, experimenting with different forms. And that's something that reviewers actually commented on my latest book, A Diary in the Age of Water, that I was experimenting. And they called it and me brave, or something like that. I forget what the word they used. I think it was meant in a good way. Anyway, but yeah, I was doing weird things, and I liked that. And that whole experimental approach is sort of like experimental jazz, right? The whole art of it is a lot of fun. Now, who's to say we don't do that in strictly in the genres? But I think in the literary fiction area, there's I don't know, more of an openness to it, or almost even an expectation of the art form per se.
So then this kind of begs the question, if I may, what are you looking to get out of your writing career?
Change the world. Hey, why are you laughing? I can laugh.
I agree. I immediately started laughing. Yeah, I couldn't help myself.
I know. I don't know. Oh, no, seriously, though, I guess.
Oh, but it rings true.
It does, actually. It's an almost stupid thing to say, but in its simplicity, I would think almost every writer wants to do that.
Yeah.
Have a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, I do. But so your study is limnology, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, tell us what that is, and how does it inform your writing?
Okay.
Is that maybe the secret to what your writing is?
Yeah, probably is not such a secret. So the study of limnology is limnos in Greek means water. Ology is the study of. So it's basically the study of water.
Yeah.
But there are lots of scientific pursuits genres of science that study water, hydrology, and others,
Yeah.
Oceanography. So limnology is the study of fresh water, but it's more on a systems basis. Hydrology is more the movement of water and everything else. Limnology studies the chemistry, biology, and physics of water and how it interacts with the watershed. In other words, on a system basis,
Right.
what goes in, what goes out, what changes, what happens in a lake or a river or a stream or whatever, what the dynamics are. And so it's a multidisciplinary study within itself, right? It incorporates geography, climatology, as well as all the different sciences to do with the water itself. And a lot of fun to do.
And the biology, I guess, because
Definitely the biology.
the ecosystem will have such a huge impact on
definitely.
what happens.
Yeah. So ecosystem impacts, and then the ecosystem within impacts back out, and, the cycle, etc. So it's like aquatic ecology in a way, but it's more than that. But it encompasses that, and that's sort of where I started. I started off as a stream ecologist, and then I got into the bigger systems thing. Wrote a bunch of papers. Some were groundbreaking, which was really cool.
Well done.
Yeah.
How were they groundbreaking?
They discovered something. I discovered something new, and my supervisor allowed me to make literally a 45-degree turn in my pursuit of my thesis to pursue this thing. And we wrote a paper together, and it was groundbreaking. It was really
that's
cool.
So exciting.
And it was a discovery. It was an accident. It was an anomaly that I discovered in what I was doing. It's like discovering penicillin, It was just so freaking cool.
The woman who wrote Lab Girl, I can't pronounce her last name correctly. It's Hope Jarin or Yaren, something like that. She talks about a moment like that in her book, that's what she got into science for, was to have a moment just like that. Finding out something new that nobody has found out before.
You can't count on that. You can't plan for that. Mm-mm. It just happens. I had no idea that was going to happen.
Very cool.
And it was, I bless my supervisor. God bless him. The coolest dude, my supervisor, let me pursue this because it took me away from my thesis to do it. But he recognized what was going on, obviously.
A good scientist, in other words.
Yeah.
He's saw the opportunity.
Yeah. No, I don't believe you've said what it is, though. What is this discovery?
So I was studying how periphyton colonize surfaces, periphyton being attached algae in streams.
Okay.
And I was really looking at different streams, streams polluted in some way, others chemically polluted, others agriculturally polluted, still chemically, I suppose, natural organics, and then pristine. And looking at the different communities that were settling there and growing. So settling, colonizing, and then how they grew as a community. So two different things going on there, right? Which settle first, etc.
Right.
Succession. In order to do that, I had to create new substrates for them to settle on, because they settle on anything, right? Any surface, rocks, plants, etc.
Right.
So I created a little slide holder, and I used glass slides, which I thought was really smart. I wasn't the only one, but I thought I was. Because the whole idea of the slide is you then have your community right there, and then you just go put it on the microscope, and there it is. You don't have to do anything, right? You just remove it and put it on there, and you look at these guys. And I thought that was brilliant. But what I discovered, so that's what I was doing. That was what the thesis was about, looking at which communities form where, how, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
A behemoth of a study, really. So it's like doing a novel, And in the meantime, I discovered a short story, tucked away. This weird short story. So I discovered that depending on which way the slide was oriented to the current, whether it was this way or that way, I guess you can't see, whether it was parallel or
perpendicular
across.
or square.
Yeah, she's wiggling her hand.
Thank you.
Angling her hand.
I'm doing the royal wave.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, so I discovered that they colonized the surface differently depending on the way the slide was oriented to the current. So in the slide that was parallel, they preferred the algae, the periphyton, preferred the front edge or the back edge, and they didn't bother with the middle. In the slide that was across the current, in other words, the current was coming across the slide, they grew in patches all across the slide with no preference for the edge. So I had to figure out why this was happening. And oh, by the way, I also coined a word, a term, which got used as well. Which I'm just blithering here.
No. This is
the term was the edge effect. Do you like that? That's cool.
No, that's great.
Yeah, obviously a U2 fan.
Yeah.
The edge effect.
Yeah, right. There you are. Anyway, so I went into, I had to go into fluid dynamics, particle physics, and all that kind of stuff. So I talked to various people in the university, and I came up with a model to explain it. And it was based on turbulence and laminar flow and settling capacity and I'm not going to go all into all the details, but basically the nuts and bolts of it is these little bittles, these little diatoms, mostly diatoms, were caught in this little mini vortex.
It was
they had more
current,
chance
basically.
to land.
Yeah, that was the problem.
Whereas in laminar, the microcurrent, laminar flow, they were just flushed across, right?
Couldn't do it.
So it was all about flow and stuff. And so I created a model, did some, fancy whatever, data processing and modeling and everything, and created a gorgeous little paper.
Well, I think that's super cool. You're adding to the body of human knowledge.
That's really cool. Yeah. And I even have a sequel for you. If the first book is called The Edge Effect, the second one we call The Bono Behavior.
Actually, I like that. I guess I'll have to acknowledge you, right? I will. I'll put you in the front.
Feel free.
Okay, now we actually are, I must confess, getting close to our limit. But I do want to ask one more question just to tie up all loose ends, which is is there any particular reason you began your life afraid of water?
Oh, I was not a good swimmer, and I think that's reason enough, to be honest. Anyway,
Nina, thank you very much for talking to us today. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Oh, that was a delight.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You guys are fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Okie dokie.
Joe, I'm really enjoying this. This has been fun, but I don't want to do this podcast anymore.
You're talking about stopping the podcast.
No, I'm just kidding. But I do want to take August off.
I just had a heart attack, Mark.
I was just trying to get that rise out of you. So yeah, I think we should take August off. I think we should end of July and come back after Labor Day.
I think that's a terrific idea. Why don't we do a special episode to finish the whole thing off?
A very special episode?
A very special episode, yes.
And we're going to launch your book, right?
Yes. We're going to launch my book, Adventures in the Radio Trade, with a special live edition of Re-Creative.
That sounds perfect. So we'll do that on the 30th.
Sunday the 30th will be a special live edition of Re-Creative, after which we'll take August off.
And then we'll be back on...
After Labor Day.
After Labor Day. I'll take my white pants off at that point.
Your white pants.
Right? Because you're not supposed to wear white after Labor Day.
Do I look like someone who pays any attention to that kind of...
Do I look like someone who has white pants?